The ballroom glittered under 1,000 crystal lights, but little Sophie Bennet wasn't looking at the chandeliers or the gowns that swept across the marble floor. She was staring straight at her mother. "Mom," she said, her voice barely louder than the clink of champagne glasses. "When do I get a dad? I actually like." Madeline Bennet, 42, CEO of Bennet Industries, and widowed for 5 years, froze mid-sip. Around them, the city's elite laughed and mingled, unaware that her 10-year-old daughter had just pierced her heart with a question no corporate negotiation had ever prepared her for. She knelt, smoothing Sophie's golden hair. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I mean a real dad," Sophie said earnestly. "Someone who listens to me, not just you." The words carried the unshakable innocence of a child and the sharp truth adults often avoid. Madeline knew her daughter wasn't asking for fairy tales. She was asking for partnership for a man worthy of standing beside both of them. That night, back at their penthouse, the city lights spilling like rivers through the glass, Madeline made a decision. No more polite, staged introductions arranged by business associates. This time Sophie would have a say. 4 weeks. That's what she gave herself to find someone who could fit into their lives not as a headline in a society column, but as family. Neither of them could guess that the man who would matter most wasn't even on her carefully curated list. Madeline's plan was meticulous. She asked her trusted COO, Nora Fields, to vet 5 highly respected men each, polished, successful, and with ties to her company's philanthropic projects. There was Evan Price, a sharp-witted attorney who volunteered at public schools. Dr. Marcus Hall, a pediatric cardiologist with a gift for empathy. Gregory Walsh, a financial strategist with a reputation for turning numbers into miracles. Luis Ortega, an architect devoted to designing humane, people-centered spaces. And Raymond Carter, a second-generation hotel owner known for his precision and grace under pressure. Over coffee in the office lounge, Madeline laid out the rules for Sophie. Daylight meetings only, no media, and every encounter would be as ordinary as possible. Parks, museums, casual lunches. "This isn't an audition," Madeline told her. "We're just meeting people like people do." Sophie grinned. "And there has to be ice cream." The first meeting was with Luis at a construction site, where his team was building a mixed-use complex. He handed Sophie a tiny hard hat with Bennett stenciled on the side. "No bad questions here," he said. She giggled when he explained that pigeons were always invited because they never signed NDAs. As they walked the perimeter, Luis talked about buildings as if they were living things, how strong bones needed soft edges, how every wall should be kind to the people inside. Sophie listened intently, touching the cold steel beams like they were part of a secret. But the real surprise came on the way up to the rooftop view. The old freight elevator groaned, stalled, and went silent. The air grew close. Sophie's fingers tightened around her mother's coat. Then a calm voice filtered through the metal. "Name's Daniel. I'm here to get you out. Let's breathe like we're blowing out birthday candles." Neither Madeline nor Sophie knew it yet, but Daniel Brooks, the building's janitor, had just stepped into their story. Daniel Brooks wasn't what Madeline Bennet expected to find inside the elevator shaft, tall, broad-shouldered, with a face weathered not by age but by long days of honest work. His Navy maintenance uniform was smudged with grease, yet his movements were deliberate, almost graceful. "All right, folks, I've got you," he called down, prying open the inner doors with a practiced ease. He crouched to meet Sophie's gaze first, his eyes steady and kind. "We're just a few feet from the landing. He'll get you out, no rush?" Sophie nodded, mimicking his deep, even breaths until the panic softened from her face. Minutes later, they stepped into the bright hallway safe. Daniel dusted his hands on a rag, ready to slip away without fuss. but Sophie clung to her hard hat like it was treasure. "You didn't just fix the elevator," she said. "You fixed me." Daniel's mouth curved into a quiet smile. "Guess that makes us even." That night, Sophie insisted they add his name to the list. Madeline hesitated. He wasn't a polished suitor, didn't carry the pedigree her circle prized. But something about the way he saw her daughter, not as a CEO's kid, not as a checklist, unsettled her assumptions. Days later, fate crossed their paths again. Madeline was wrestling with a last-minute setback on the Riverton project, an ambitious mixed-use development teetering on the edge of collapse due to a structural flaw. As she paced the site, Daniel appeared at her side, blueprint in hand. "Your load-bearing specs are off," he said simply. "Shift the anchor points here, and here you'll save the frame and half your budget." Skeptical but desperate, she followed his suggestion. Within hours, the crisis was resolved. Luis, impressed, muttered, "You've got an uncut diamond here, Bennett." Madeline looked at Daniel differently that day, not just as the man who'd calmed her daughter, but as someone who could see solutions where others saw problems. And Sophie? She just grinned as if she'd known it all along. Word of Daniel Brooks' sharp eye for structural design spread quickly, too quickly for Madeline Bennett's comfort. At first, it was murmurs in boardrooms, curious side glances at project meetings, but soon the tone shifted. Among her high society peers, the idea that a janitor-turned-fix-it man had influenced a multi-million-dollar project was unsettling. The tension came to a head at a rooftop fundraiser where champagne flutes clinked under the city skyline. Richard Evans, a long-standing investor with a polished smile and a cutting tongue, cornered Madeline near the terrace railing. "Interesting choice of advisors lately," he said, swirling his drink. "I hear your maintenance man is becoming quite indispensable." Madeline kept her voice even. "Daniel has skills worth listening to." Richard's grin thinned. Skills belong where they're valued among their own, not at the table with people shaping the future of Bennett Industries. His words dripped with the kind of condescension that masked a threat. 2 days later, Daniel was abruptly reassigned to a maintenance facility across town. Officially, it was operational restructuring. Unofficially, it was exile. When Sophie found out, she stormed into her mother's office. "You told me this wasn't about fancy clothes or big bank accounts," she said, eyes bright with hurt. "If Daniel can help, why can't he stay?" The question echoed in Madeline's mind long after Sophie left. It wasn't just about Daniel, it was about who had the power to decide who belonged. She had fought her way to the top, yet here she was letting others dictate the borders of her own world. That evening, Madeline stood at the edge of her penthouse balcony, watching the city lights stretch toward the horizon. Somewhere out there, Daniel was clocking into a job far below his talent, not because he'd failed, but because he'd been deemed out of place. And for the first time in years, she felt the sharp sting of injustice, not in theory, but in her own life. The blow came on a Tuesday morning. Madeline Bennett arrived at headquarters to find a storm brewing in the glass-walled conference room. Security officers stood by the door, and at the center of it all sat Daniel Brooks, his hands clasped tightly, jaw set. Across from him, Richard Evans projected righteous indignation, like a stage actor in his prime. "I caught him in the Midtown Tower archive," Richard announced, waving a folder as if it were Exhibit A. "These are restricted blueprints. Sensitive intellectual property. He was stealing them." Madeline's gut told her something was off. Daniel didn't flinch under the accusation. He simply said, "I was asked to retrieve a set of floor load specs for a safety check." Nothing more. Richard smirked, asked by who no one's admitting to it. For a moment, the room hung heavy with suspicion. Then the door creaked open and a small voice piped up. "I asked him," said Ethan Daniels' 12-year-old son, clutching his tablet. "We were at the site together last Saturday. He showed me where the building was sagging, and I told him I wanted to see the old plans. He held up the tablet displaying time-stamped photo-clear proof that Daniel had been working, not stealing. The color drained from Richard's face, but Madeline didn't waste the moment. "Looks like your story's collapsing faster than an unreinforced beam," she said coolly. Daniel's reinstated effective immediately. "And Richard don't ever weaponize my company's security against one of my people again." Later, as Daniel walked out beside her, Ethan trailing close, Madeline felt the balance shift. This wasn't about charity or appearances anymore. This was about trust, and Daniel had earned hers in front of the very people who doubted him. Sophie's reaction that evening was simple. "Told you he belongs on the list." Madeline smiled. For the first time, she didn't need convincing. The invitation came on a Thursday afternoon, tucked inside Sophie's art folder, like a secret. "Weekend getaway, just us," it read in Madeline Bennett's looping script. But there was more. "Bring Ethan." By Friday evening, Daniel Brooks found himself driving up the winding coastal road toward a sprawling cliffside resort, Ethan in the passenger seat, gawking at the ocean views. When they pulled into the cobblestone courtyard, Sophie came bounding down the steps, her hair whipping in the sea breeze. "You made it!" she cheered, throwing her arms around Ethan before darting to Daniel. Madeline appeared moments later, dressed simply in a linen blouse and jeans her CEO armor left behind in the city. "This weekend isn't about work or lists," she said, her tone softer than he'd ever heard. "It's about seeing if this," she gestured to all four of them, "feels real." The resort days unfolded in a rhythm Daniel hadn't known he missed. Morning walks on the shore collecting shells, afternoons by the pool, where Sophie insisted on teaching Ethan her world-famous cannonball technique, and quiet dinners where laughter outweighed small talk. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Daniel found himself standing beside Madeline on the deck. "They get along like they've known each other forever," she murmured, watching the kids chase fireflies across the lawn. "Maybe they have," Daniel replied. "Some people just meet and fit." Madeline turned to him, then her eyes reflecting the orange-pink glow. "I didn't bring you here to test you, Daniel. I brought you here because I wanted to see if I could picture this." And he asked. Her smile was quiet but certain. "I can." For the first time, Daniel felt the ground under his feet wasn't borrowed, it was theirs if they chose to stand on it together. The gala was meant to be a polished finale. 4 weeks of introductions culminating in one elegant announcement. The grand hall shimmered with gold light cameras discreetly poised, and the city's elite leaning in for whispers. Each of the 5 original candidates was in attendance, their smiles fixed glasses of champagne in hand. Madeline Bennett had rehearsed the moment in her mind, a few gracious words, a nod to the process, and a poised reveal. But before she could step to the microphone, Sophie tugged on her gown. "Can I say it?" she asked, her eyes shining with mischief. Madeline hesitated, then handed her the mic. Sophie walked to the center of the stage, the hem of her dress brushing the marble floor. "Thank you for coming," she began, her voice carrying farther than anyone expected. "My mom told me we were looking for someone who'd listen to me, care about us, and make our family better. I found him." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Sophie turned toward the back of the room. "It's Daniel Brooks," head swiveled. Daniel, standing near the exit in his best navy suit, borrowed from a friend, looked stunned. The guests exchanged bewildered glances. Whispers hissed like static. Madeline joined Sophie at center stage, her hand resting proudly on her daughter's shoulder. "She's right," Madeline said clearly. "I'm choosing Daniel. Not because of his title, but because of his integrity. Because he's shown my daughter and me that respect, kindness, and trust are worth more than any resume." The room fractured, some clapping, others stiff with disapproval. Richard Evans' jaw tightened like steel. But Daniel stepped forward, meeting their eyes with quiet dignity. That night, as they left together, Madeline felt the sting of judgment on her back, but also Sophie's hand in hers, warm and certain. And in that small, unshakable moment, she knew they'd made the right choice. The fallout began before the champagne flutes from the gala were cleared away. By Monday morning, the Bennett Industries boardroom was thick with tension. A row of directors sat like a jury, eyes sharp papers fanned in front of them. Madeline began Charles Whitmore, the board's chairman. His voice measured but laced with disapproval. Your public announcement has created quite the stir. Investors are concerned about the company's image. Aligning yourself with an employee of Daniel Brooks' background raises questions. Madeline kept her gaze steady. What questions? His ethics? His skill? Or the fact that he doesn't come from the same cocktail circuit as the rest of us? A few directors shifted uncomfortably, but Charles pressed on. Perception is reality in our market. We cannot afford to appear careless. Careless Madeline leaned forward, her voice low but unyielding. What's careless is valuing appearances over substance. Daniel has proven himself under pressure in crisis and in his character. That is the perception I choose to stand behind. By the afternoon, the press had caught wind of the board's unease. Headlines speculated about the CEO's risky romance, and social media buzzed with both support and criticism. Rather than retreat, Madeline called a press conference in the Bennett Tower atrium. Cameras flashed as she stepped to the podium, Daniel at her side, Sophie standing just behind them. This is not a statement about scandal, she began. It's a statement about choice, about surrounding yourself with people who lift you up no matter their title or income bracket. Daniel Brooks is part of my life because he's earned my trust, my respect, and my daughter's admiration. If that challenges anyone's definition of status good, it's time it did. The room erupted, some cheers, some murmurs, but the message was out, unshakable and public. Madeline knew the fight wasn't over, but she also knew they'd taken the first step toward changing more than just one family story. 6 months later, the Bennett estate looked nothing like the fortress it once was. The manicured garden now held a white arch draped with wildflowers, and the guest list included not just corporate partners, but neighbors, longtime employees, and friends from every corner of Daniel Brooks and Madeline Bennett's lives. Under the golden light of a late spring sunset, Madeline walked down the aisle, Sophie beaming at her side, Ethan waiting proudly with Daniel. There were no society photographers angling for exclusive, only genuine smiles, tears, and the quiet hum of happiness. They exchanged vows that spoke less about wealth and more about weathering storms, about listening, choosing each other every day, and raising their children to believe kindness was the greatest currency. After the ceremony, Madeline announced the creation of the Brooks Bennett Scholarship Fund, dedicated to helping those who had faced loss and wanted a fresh start. Daniel squeezed her hand, and Sophie whispered, "Told you this would work." As laughter spilled into the night, they weren't CEO and janitor anymore. They were a family built not by status, but by choice. True worth isn't measured by titles, bank accounts, or the circles we stand in. It's revealed in how we show up for each other when no one is watching. Love, respect, and trust aren't gifts of privilege. They are earned in the everyday moments that matter most. Have you ever met someone who completely changed your view of what success means? Share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear it. And if you believe kindness can rewrite any story, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one.